Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO, and I am grateful you've dropped in on another episode of the podcast where week after week I have the distinct honor of meeting the most amazing people who share their insights with you, and hopefully they inspire you. And I know they inspire me every single time. And we do this podcast because I care about the C-suite leader. I want to partner with them to provide them the tools they need to navigate with confidence. And this week, I am so honored to have with me Andrea Petrone, who is a top ranked performance and executive coach, facilitator, and speaker, recognized among the top 2% of executive coaches in the UK. Known as the CEO Whisperer, Andrea partners with CEOs and their leadership teams to excel in high stakes environments where the pressure to perform is relentless. And he's also the host of the World Class Leadership Show. And just before we jumped on here, we have so much in common, but I cannot wait to learn more about him and bring his story to you. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's such a pleasure being, with you today.
And the way you say Deborah is so wonderful. I love it. I don't know if I'd call myself Deborah, but it sounds wonderful. But thank you so much for being on the show. And to my audience, very interesting. So he reached out to me and we went back and forth a little bit. And the fact that he's has so much CEO experience and insights, and he was very kind in how he introduced himself to me and expressing interest on being on the show. So I'm grateful to get to know more about him. And I will hand the mic off to you, Andrea, to share a bit about yourself and your career journey. So thank you.
No, thank you. And so it's a privilege, really a privilege to spend a little bit more time with you and your audience, Deborah. And well, my story is, I think, is an interesting story from a leadership standpoint because the work I do now, so as you said, and I'm an executive coach and primarily work with CEOs and the C-suite. So either one-to-one or leadership teams. And I've been doing this for the last 6 years from, across the globe, really, because I work from clients from North America to Saudi Arabia. So very interesting stories, but also very interesting different cultures where you operate as a coach, but also as a leader. But interesting enough, my story before that is it's quite interesting because I come from corporate, as many of us do, and I lived all over the world, thanks to the industry I was in, because I worked in oil and gas for many years. So working West Africa, North Africa, Middle East, and then moved back to Italy, my original country, but then Scandinavia, and then landed in the UK. And across this journey, I didn't only learn about different cultures and leadership apply to very different environments, but also how to apply leadership in very challenging environments. Because most of the countries where I operated, worked as a senior leaders, were countries where there was dictatorship or there were very challenging context and conditions where companies they operate at the time. And there was such an incredible training opportunity when I still was a corporate leader. Interesting as well, I became a CEO at 35 years old. So fast track career, quite young CEO. So everything was really kind of working for me in that perspective. But then I realized that was not enough. I wanted to move more into consulting to understand more a broader level, how really business operated. And then one lesson at a time, I really recognized that to me, the next step of my personal fulfillment, which is more than a career, was start working with others, helping others, and transferring all my learning in these more than 20 years in such a very interesting and high-stake environments, and bringing back to the new population leaders, see whether we can help them to elevate and be, more impactful than, other leaders that I've seen in my career.
So I love your accent.
Thanks.
It's wonderful. And you said that you've lived all over the world, but I don't sense that it's been modified in any way. Sometimes people, when they move and are living away from home, start losing their accent and adopting a little bit of the new, but that's not happened to you. I'm just curious, why is that? It just,
Well, I think it's
No, it's just a curious because
It's no, well, I think it's a little bit more into, our from South Europe. So people from South Europe, they
yeah,
tend to have quite strong accents. So
yeah,
whether we like it or no, I think we keep it. And also probably that is our own identity. I mean, we shouldn't never,
of course.
complain or, forget where we are coming from. And I think it's a good way for reminding ourselves that we operate in a new country, a different country, but we have, we inherited a different culture. Our families are still in our own country. So with no intention, and probably still keep that sort of accents that you're hearing right now.
So what I also want to comment is the fact that I am originally from the East Coast of the United States. I'm a
Right.
Jersey girl. And so even in New Jersey, you have different accents and maybe the way I say daughter or draw. People say, "Where are you from?" You sound like you're from. And even when I've come to Cincinnati, Ohio, I seem to have kept a bit of my accent because after somebody's been talking to me, and maybe if I start speeding up, they say, "You're not from here. You must be from the East Coast." So yeah, I
Yes.
celebrate our individuality. I was just curious, but oh my, what an amazing career. And I think I want to just jump into a couple things that you
Sure.
said. So you said that at an early age, you became a CEO. And I was wondering, what was that like? You said at like 35, you became a CEO of a company.
That's
Um,
correct.
did you have all the experience and tools and knowledge that you needed, or what was it like coming into such a position of responsibility at such a young age?
Yeah, I'm sure you know the answer. So the answer is no, I did not have, the right skills to manage a company. By the way, that was a joint venture company. So it was not only leading and operating, in one single company, actually was emerging two different environments, two different companies. So I would say that was a kind of a challenge. I was not ready for that, but I think I learned few things along the way that really helped me to succeed in a very difficult job. And I think the first one, which now is something that I bring back during my coaching, etc., with my clients, it's all about mindset. And I know it might look like a cliche, right? Because we all talk about mindset, but that really is what mindset, that's really what makes a difference when you lead for the first time. Is really less about the skills that you have. You're going to learn by doing, how to communicate better, how you engage your people, how you can you be impactful in strategy. But the reality is, and I think the question for you and your audience, Deborah, is how are you approaching, a very challenging senior leadership role with the right attitude to lead powerfully? And to me, and then we can explore more, but to me, it's all about being in a position of discovery, meaning be there to learn and be there to try to understand what you don't know. But that requires something from senior leaders because it requires less ego, less status, less a lot. It requires more of something that is not necessarily in a DNA or people that are fast, track career um, achievers. So
Yeah, this so resonates with me. I also became like a director of quality at the age of 35. And while I loved having the title and responsibility, there was an awful lot that I did not know about business, and there was no support system for me. Hence,
yes.
that particular role, I crashed and burned. But I learn a lot from it. But one of the things you said is, when you get into these roles, we're not meant to know everything. And what should we do less of and more of? And I realized by being a deep listener, doing more listening than speaking, because I used to be a subject matter expert. So we were celebrated to speak and put ideas and solutions out there. As a leader, I learned that I had to do deep listening to be able to hear and cut through the noise of whatever the situation is. And when I did speak, speak with fewer words, but be very crisp and concise so that you can allow the team to calm down and then have clear
Mm.
focus and vision, and then to be able to move forward. So it's again the dynamics and the way you interact with the team changes significantly when you rise to such levels of leadership and responsibility.
It is. And I don't know your experience, Deborah, but for me, I've been a senior leader early days in my career, and I always managed and led teams of people that were way older than me. And that's, is a caveat, or, of becoming, one of the earlier leader in the organization. And look, and I tried myself. You have really two options. So one option is leading, directing, and be the boss, and because you want to honor your status or your title. And that didn't work with me. The other option is being service and trying to be there and supporting the others and learning along the journey. That to me made a huge difference, because I didn't only create good performance results, but most importantly, I created such a level of trust in people because they realized that I was one of them, despite the different title and the status. Then you still need to keep boundaries, but that doesn't really mean that you should be really a leader that's close to your people. And that's, to me, was the major learning. I still apply today, and I coach people around that.
So I want to go down this a little bit more because we can talk in generalities, but I want this also to be a learning opportunity for my audience. When we think about changing the dynamic of a leader and being a servant leader, what comes to mind? What is a story that you can share where you became a servant leader to somebody on your team or in the organization? And because you took that role versus directing, what was the impact to that person, and what was the result? Because again, understanding the impact of being a different kind of leader is really important. So what's an example of where you performed in that way?
There is a perfect example, and I post it on LinkedIn, by the way, 2 or 3 times per year, because it engages a lot of people, because it's true. It's a real story. Is early on, when I was working in an organization that were managing drilling operations in the middle of the sea. And at that time, I was promoted, and I was already working in the office, like the country manager, etc. And someone operating on the platform on a drilling rig, he was reporting to me and was 20, 25 years older than me. Okay. And when I started to work on this project, um, what happened a few months later, there was a big fire on board of the platform, unfortunately. But good news is, nobody really got hurt. However, I was potentially in a position to make orders, to direct how things were supposed to be done in terms of recovery, maintenance, future, etc. But I didn't want to do that. As soon as I tried, by the way, what I got in return was just rejection. Rejection of, okay, who are you? Why you're saying this? I have 25, 30 years of experience. Why should I listen to a young guy? Regardless, I don't care about your title. That was the beginning of that conversation, because, of course, I had all the pressure from my own uh, bosses, etc. Say, you have to solve it. You have to do something. You have to. Now, when I realized that was not working, what happened is I really decided to go on the platform and spending time 2 weeks with the same person and his team and say, I'm here to help. I wanted to see what I can do for you in order to make sure that we can solve that. That simple gesture made a huge difference to the person, to the team. So I put my gloves. I mean, I don't know how much you are familiar with the environment, but it's dirty. It's a tough environment, it's tough conditions when you operate. And I decided I'm gonna be fully in. I'm gonna go fully in and working with these guys and helping. And because I'm not going to care about my title, they've seen me part of them. We started to really create ownership, accountability with each other, trust, because we honor the word whenever we say something. At the end of the day, we recover, we made the client happy, and then the platform started to work at a different level. Really, I think it was a great indication how you need to build relationships and trust in organizations if you really want to get things done. So that was my
That-
learning.
so I can so that so resonates with me because again, as I was an up and coming professional, they train you, get results. You
Yes.
need to fix people, you need to fix process, you need to fix tools, and that's where you get your early success. And what I realized later as I rose to those higher level positions, especially when we worked with new groups or acquired a small company, leaders would often skip over one of these particular points. And it's one of my compass points in the CEO's compass. And I use the word pride. when we don't take the time to really deeply understand one's gifts or intellectual property, or in your point, situation, the one with 25 years of technical experience, when we skip over that and go right to action, we lose all of that person. And then you're met with conflict or rejection or, a barrier. I find when we spend time building deeper relationships, to your point, to really understand what are their gifts and what is it that made them special and why they have such longevity there. We may not need that right now, but in the process, you've built a relationship. So when you go down to the floor, to the platform, and we're all hands on deck, they immediately have your back. They know that you're going to serve, and they will give you more of what they know and how to solve the problem. So again, we have to spend time understanding the pride of the people and building that trust, because then they're ultimately going to perform, and you're there just to serve.
It is, it is. And yet we still see a lot of leaders, they are directing, commanding, controlling just because they think they're going to get, way better results by doing so. I think we have to change the narrative here. So we need to really to understand that leadership is serving others and be one of your people, meaning you are there to protect them, you are there to respect them, you are there to let them talk and listen without any sort of repercussion, consequences. It's all about creating an environment of trust and safety. And it's fascinating because that's, it's a fantastic connection to what I shared earlier in terms of my experience, working and leading in different cultures. Because when you work in a different culture, there are two different cultures that come to play. So one is the environment outside the organization. That is a culture per se. But then also there is the internal culture, the workplace culture, where you have to create the conditions as a leader to allow what we just shared to happen. And that's not a given. That's not something that's, it's by default. You have to create it by design as a leader. It's fascinating how many leaders, CEOs I interviewed my own show, the World Class Leader Show, and it's crazy how all of them, Deborah, you might not believe it, but we keep talking about strategy and future by design and talking about engaging employees, etc. But they all come back to one single point. Without the right culture in our organization, we're not able to get any sort of results. So the culture needs to be on the top of any CEOs and senior leaders' agenda.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I, have a particular client where it's just so large. I don't think I could change the culture. I mean, by our own behaviors, we might be able to impact the culture, one person, one group, one business unit at a time, but it's a very long, challenging process unless you can change it from the top. I think this one is about risk and having the safety to be able to say what needs to be said. We need to stop this project. We need to hold other people accountable. It's a little bit of a fear environment. And if we can't change that, we're not going to get the best of people's mind or the right level of engagement. So, very, very critical to have the right culture within an organization. But I did have another question for you around culture. Well, actually, no, I'm going to come back to this one. Being that you have had the ear of so many CEOs, and I too, I've interviewed many on the show, and in service, when I drop into a client, I'm usually working directly for the CEO. I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the trends or current challenges that you are seeing that they are sharing with you that you have to help them through in addition to culture?
Yes, and there is one among many, many things, but there is a one is very common. And is also the one where I normally focus on more into my coaching, especially on the one-to-one level, is how dealing with the level of ambiguity and uncertainty they're facing right now. So here's the situation, at least, from this part of the world, that's what I see, is the level of pressure for CEOs, but generally speaking, for all C-suite leaders, is incredibly high. Has never been so high as it is right now. And there are some specific reasons why this is happening. So number one reason is the average tenure of a CEOs now is shorter. Why this is happening? Because shareholders, they are expecting more results and better results in a shorter period of time because they can't wait. They just can't wait because the current market condition and trends, they don't allow organizations to spend time and years in order to get things right. So pressure is increasing, the level of volatility, market uncertainty, etc., is after COVID is way, way higher than before. The level of flexibility, ambiguity that is required to lead is also high for that specific reason. Meaning, what they're all trying to say is we're dealing very high stake moment, and we want to create an organizations where everybody is comfortable to operate in an environment where you need to be fully adaptable, be flexible, and change things as we change because our business plans are changing. Our goals are also changing. So how can you really cope in an environment where when things keep changing due to the current conditions? That is a big question, and that is what is on top of mind, at least of the people I know, I work, and I interview on my show. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, it does. I mean, people, it goes against the grain. We have systems and processes and
Mhm.
cadences that we operate to. As a company grows, you need that discipline and focus. But I remember working with some clients, one CEO of a company. Every time we had our one-on-one, I always started the agenda. Okay, so before I get into what I wanted to talk about, what has changed? And week to week, something would
Yes.
change, either a client or a new employee. You actually have to live with change as a constant, and how quickly can we adopt without throwing away the old plan. But
Mm,
where do we need to stay the course, and where do we need to be flexible? Hence why I'm even seeing another client of mine is they know they're growing. They have to grow. They've got stakeholders in there, and they're going to be hiring. Well, they already know that there is risk in sustainable, repeatable processes, but we keep bringing in new employees. That change is going to be a constant. So, how can we assure that the people, when they come out into a production environment, are trained with everything that they need? We error proof as much as possible to take out the human factor and train people up so they can make more critical decisions. That's a constant. And leaders that can recognize that I've got to do something to mitigate that risk, because I'm always going to have variables coming into my process, but how can I smooth that out so I can be a little bit more dependable and only respond to the few things that maybe I can anticipate? So I'm absolutely seeing the same thing.
yeah, and building on what you just said, which is totally right for me, is sometimes leader they over rely on those systems and those processes because what they don't necessarily consider is this system operate only if the human system in the organization work nicely. So what is the non-human system against the human system is important because most of the time, especially if you work with the big consulting firms coming to help, they're bringing the non-human systems. But what really make a difference in an organization? Performance are driven by the human system. So if you don't understand how to operate, change, and tweak as necessary the human systems, meaning could be the culture, meaning could be how people listen and talk, etc. Guess what type of results you get?
Yeah, so when you install some of these operating systems, these well-respected operating systems, whether it is EOS
Sure.
or ISO 9001, which I'm an expert in, they're a great foundation to set the right business processes in place. But I had in a situation where in a plant, we had a particular process that we designed to mitigate risk. But all of a sudden, we get a failure out in the field and it causes a lot of chaos. Well, where did we miss? We had this standard, we had this process. And when you audit it A to Z, it performs exactly as expected. Well, if you stand in one place and watch the interaction of humans over first shift, over second shift, and oh my, what happens on third shift? All of a sudden, you see the humans interact with the process not as expected. And that's where we get the uncertainty, because we don't take that as almost like the third dimension of you've got a
Totally.
process A to Z, X versus Y. That human interaction and how they're going to use it, we often don't account for.
Yeah, and look, I'm a big fan of processes and systems. I mean, we really need them. But again, the question is how humans operate within the systems. Because if the humans they're not operating as they're supposed to operate, whatever system you have in place is not going to make any difference in terms of performance. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. And but again, I think the easiest thing, I wouldn't say is laziness, but the easiest thing for leaders to think is well, I have a great system in place, so everything is going to work. Well, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, so we have to invest a little time in risk management, risk identification, both what is in front of us and even the absurd or obscure possibility of something external interacting. Again, I found sometimes leaders will throw the dice and say, well, oh, that will never happen here because we've got these great systems. And then, of course, we have economic downfall, we have a pandemic, we have acts of Mother Nature, and we rolled the dice and we lost sometimes. So I think leaders need to be highly attuned, not be fear based on whether to take certain decisions, but we have to be risk aware of what those risks are and prioritize where will we try to mitigate that risk, where can we better understand humans
Yes.
as well to mitigate that risk. When we started this conversation, you introduced yourself, you introduced a topic that was very interesting to me. Now, I understand a little bit about different cultures depending on where you are at in the
Yes.
world, but you also said that you've operated in very challenging environments that I'm not completely aware of. And I'm wondering if there's an example or a story where, okay, cultural differences, but situational differences was extreme. And I would love to understand a story or an example of what that's like.
Yeah, so there are many, many stories.
Yeah.
Some of the countries, I think the situation was clearly worse than others. So what I can tell you is um, the current culture of the country where you operate, and there are so many people right now, they are really operating outside of their own country. So it's also a step outside of your own comfort zone as a leader.
Mm,
So what normally leaders tend to do, there are three different ways to lead in different circumstances. So one is they can fully embrace the new culture and they are one of them. I'll come back then to the point of what is some specific example. The other point is you're going to essentially keep your own origins, your own culture and bring into the new country. And believe me, that's majority of people. That's what they do.
mm.
Okay. That's why the little China, the little Italy, the little whatever,
Yes.
that's what they do. They're trying to recreate their own country, their own culture into new country because they don't really want to feel absorbed by the new country where they live. And also there is a third option. The third option is really find a good mix of both, where you keep, when you're trying to, when you feel really that you live in discovery, try to identify what really works in your country, what you really like, what is in line with your core values and what are your own core values. So you bring, the best out of the two culture, you create a new culture for yourself. That's the sweet spot. So in my personal experience, I've been really learning a lot from about this very early days in my corporate world. So as soon as I started to operate in very challenging environments, I had already this in my mind. And that was critical, not only for survival. In some countries, it's also about survival, but it's also about thriving in this situation. So what happened to me in specifically in West Africa, as I said, I lived there for 6 months operating in a dictatorship. So there was a president that every single morning when I left home, I needed to be blocked and stopped by policemen, with a gun, pointed on my head, and they were looking for something. Normally, it's money, drinks, and whatever. So what I learned in that specific experience is you can't really apply your own personal values or you apply your own rules in a foreign countries. But what you can do, you can understand why and this is coming from and what and where this is coming from. And this is coming from poverty, it's coming from fear, it's coming from whatever happens. I gave you one specific example, but you might imagine many other examples. And back to my point of culture 1, 2, and 3, you need to understand, first of all, why people operate in very specific way. So what are the actions? Their actions are driven by the way how they see the world. It's driven by the perceptions. Perception of something drives action. Once you learn that, you can really thrive in many different cultures because you really put yourself in other people's shoes.
Yeah, when I think about you saying that, the language of the words I use is we have to seek to understand, even in our close communities. I mean, I've got relatives that like I say to myself, why do they act like this? Why can't they be like me? You know, they violate my belief system, and then there is conflict or perception issues. But we need to be as leaders more disciplined and not say people have to change or why do they act that way, but to be able to ask questions, help me to understand why or the
Exactly.
importance of this thing. And at least maybe you can't change the circumstance, their past or their present. But if you understand and you even take the time to ask, you might lower the temperature, create some level of respect in the process, and find that sweet spot to be able to move forward.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. You need to really approach your job, your life, with way, way more empathy than what we normally do. And if you are in very specific and difficult in challenging environments, you need to be forced to apply empathy. If you really want, again, survive and thrive when you are in these conditions. There is another great example about, for example, taking pills for the malaria. Malaria is, the worst, disease that is in Africa. And that specific country where I was operating at the time was the deadliest malaria ever. So it was very, very dangerous. And I remember, my boss at the time, being an Italian, being, a guy that he can do whatever he wants. He felt like powerful. He said, no, I'm not going to take any medicine, any pill. And the client said, no, you have to take the pill. Otherwise, you're going to die if you get, bitten by a mosquito. He needed time to really understand and appreciate the importance of making changes in their own habits and behaviors to really appreciate what's going on in the country. It's a small example, but just to show you that when you are in a foreign countries, you need to really respect the current culture. You need to respect what's going on, not only for for your own sake, but also for being able to operate and deal with other people there.
So, this whole conversation also goes to one of the things that I realized, especially when one of the large companies I worked with acquired a smaller company and we had to bring them onto our systems. So I took the time to go visit and understand that smaller operation. And what I learned was there's their past. I call it the compass point of past. We understand what is rich about their culture, what made them valuable and why we wanted to acquire them. And if you simply treat them like a transaction to bring them onto our system without understanding that, it's going to cause a lot of conflict. And I'm happy to say I in my area took the time to get to understand the people and what made them great. And even when we were having conflict to try to get them integrated, they were much more resourceful or agile or were willing to make changes because I took the time to understand what made them special. And I so agree with you when we talk about cultural change or change. I like to use the word evolve because we take the best of what you had, help people to understand what could be better, and then move forward together. So number three, I'll vote for that.
Love it. Love it. And also, I think it's important to remember there are microcultures operating in the same company most of the time. I mean, your example probably is one of them. So microcultures are operating sometimes even different teams inside of the same office. So you really need to be equipped as a leader today to understand these nuances. But the only way to understanding nuances, because it's in the same company most of the time, is the nuances. You need to be really able to listen and to understand. And again, to the first point, are you in inquiry for yourself? Are you in discovery? Because when you are, you can really see what is now in front of you at any given time. But you need to be willing to go, along that path.
I mean, there is something to be said when CEOs, smart CEOs, go into a company. They sit, wait, and listen for 90 days before they make any changes. Again, if there's something obvious, you make the change right away. But we need to understand the landscape, learn from others, and then hopefully it's a better decision if you choose to make changes after some period of waiting. Um,
Yes.
this is such a great conversation, but I would love for you to maybe share a little bit about because if somebody's out there and they're really enjoying listening to Andrea and I banter back and forth, and he's been truly special to talk to and see how we are so similar. But if you were wanted to find your ideal client, and maybe they're out there listening, or maybe somebody will refer to, what is the typical situation and or client that you really resonate with and would love to serve?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Deborah. Well, most of the time, I tend to work with people that are first-time CEOs or CEOs they are just joining a company. And the reason is quite simple because most of the seasoned CEOs probably they went through a number of CEOs appointments, so they are a little bit more equipped to deal with the person, at least personally, to deal with the personal transition to one job to another. But most of CEOs is the first time they lead as a CEOs, or is the first time they lead in a very specific industry or company. So I tend to work primarily with people they are in the first time CEOs. And if they're not, it's more about when they're dealing with moment of turnaround, challenging time, pressure environment, things that need to be fixed, I would say. So that is my ideal time to be involved with the CEOs and sometimes with his leadership team because that's what they need to work with. But ideally, starting all my work start with the CEOs because once you start talking to the CEO and understand the CEOs, then you can really start bringing the leadership team involved. But first is helping the CEOs to shift in the mindset from whatever he was doing before to whatever he's going to do now as a CEO. What does it mean? Not only as a business, but also personally. Because many CEOs, as we said earlier, they come to the job with a very, very, how can I say that? I wouldn't say lack of confidence because that is too much. But I can definitely tell you that, most of CEOs, when they join a new company, they don't have the confidence and they know they need to build confidence because they need to learn about the company, need to learn about the people, the culture, etc. So they are coming to the job with a lot of questions, but they don't want to share it publicly. They don't want to appear, they are not confident. So this personal transition, it's critical for every leader, and imagine for the CEO that if everybody is listening to you and is expecting answers and not necessarily in 6 9 months time, probably in 2 months time. So
Yeah, so I actually have a name of somebody who's a first-time CEO, but I told him a long time ago, based on his his persona and understanding the business challenges, I said, you need to be a CEO. And I just found out he became one 2 months ago. And I'm so happy he and his wife are both happy that he has, because he has what it takes. And it's interesting. It's an interesting mindset shift. I'll find that at any leadership level, that if they're lucky enough or they've earned the right to be at the next level, they have this confidence issue. But what they're doing is they're projecting into the future what they cannot do. What they need to do is look backwards and say, I've had these different roles, either lateral or increasing responsibility, and I was resourceful then. I learned the technical part, I learned who my resources were, and ultimately achieved a level of performance for which I'm being now recognized to be a CEO. But somehow the mind shuts off and forgets everything they did in the past. And they should have the confidence. It's just a matter of trusting themselves and trusting the people and building those deep relationships, and eventually you flourish. I understand the mindset shift. My husband once told me, he said, Deb, you could be a CEO or a plant manager. And I said, no, 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 I can't do that. And here I am, and I'm doing it, and I'm still figuring it out.
I love that. I love that. Well, I think you said it. I mean, a lot of people they get promoted to a very senior leadership role for their past, you know, experiences, track records, results, etc. And after the first honeymoon or the first few days, etc., what they realize is, oh gosh, I don't have actually the answer to that specific problem. And that's what normally is the first hit to the confidence level. By the way, which is very normal. I mean, we all going through these moments of up and downs with our own confidence. But as a CEO, sometimes it's hard to admit that you don't necessarily have all the answers and you want to. So it takes something. It takes personally something. So
So, on that note, Andrea is the CEO Whisperer, and I am so grateful that he found me and wanted to have a conversation. I know I feel wonderful about our conversation because I think we both care about that CEO, that COO. We want to give the best of what our perspective is to help them perform at their greatest level. So I do want folks in the audience to definitely reach out to you, but I'd love to give you the floor one last time for any last words for my audience and how people can connect with you.
No, thank you. Well, Deborah, it's been incredible experience spending time with you, and as expected, we are so much aligned. We share similar experiences. We see the world in a similar way. Um, well, look, what I wanted to say is it's all about mindset. It always comes back to mindset. The way how we see the world is the way how we essentially do things. So if we, for any reason, we find that we are not performing well, or we are not doing the things that we are supposed to do, there is something inside of our mind that is blocking us, which is normal. It's preventing us from, working and at the best of our own ability. So spending more time and understanding how our brain works, spending more time about understanding ourselves better is going to make probably the biggest impact to the performance of every individual. So I think that's the final message I want to share. And people, of course, they want to discuss more about this because mindset is one of the major elements of my coaching. Feel free to reach out. I mean, the podcast is a good starting point because you can hear me and hear also my ACO, so the World Class Leader Show. And of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a quite strong presence. I'm there every single day. Hopefully, you can learn something there.
All right, so Andrea, it has been a pleasure to know you. I'm grateful that you dropped in on the podcast, and I want to wish you well and continue success.
You too, Deborah, and thank you so much for the conversation.